if you have a very powerful sponsor who is just like giving all the opportunities to you on a silver platter, people are not going to be very happy about that. You will get the opportunities because that person's the boss and they don't want to upset them, right? But are they going to think well of you? Probably not, because they're going to think that the reason you got that opportunity is because of your relationship with that person.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. I'm joined today by Rosalind Chow, author of The Doors You Can Open, a new way to network, build trust, and use your influence to create a more inclusive workplace. Rosalind Chow is an associate professor of organizational behavior and theory at Carnegie Mellon University, where she studies the power of social hierarchy and its impact on diversity and inclusion efforts within organizations. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Rosalind.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here.
So, in your book, The Doors You Can Open, you say that for people to thrive, they need both mentorship and sponsorship. So correct me if I get this wrong, but I took away that mentorship, which as we traditionally think about it, is really about engaging someone, connection to the organization, figuring out how to operate inside the organization and understanding how we do things, understanding culture, with the ultimate goal of retaining that employee, making them feel part of the organization so they stick around. And sponsorship kind of changes the person's profile in the organization, maybe gives them opportunity to be seen by people that they may not have been seen before, creating opportunities for personal and professional growth inside the organization. Tell me where I'm wrong there, and then just kind of give me your take on mentorship and sponsorship.
I actually would not say that you were wrong in any sense.
That's the perfect guest. Thank you.
So what you were talking about, I think, in academic language would be this difference between subjective experience that people have as workers, and then their objective outcomes like raises, promotions, and things like that. And what you just described to me is consistent with what some of the research would suggest, which is that mentorship really is helping people have a more positive subjective experience at work. But when we're talking about objective outcomes, that's actually where sponsorship becomes very important. Um, I think about mentorship and sponsorship as being different because of who is being asked to change.
Okay.
So when you say, telling people how things typically operate, right, within the organization, that's really letting them know so that they can shift their behavior so that they are socialized more easily into the organization. So really with that kind of advice and feedback and coaching, we're essentially telling mentees, here's how you should behave,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or keep on doing what it is that you're doing. It doesn't have to be like, oh, you're doing this wrong. It could also be like, you're doing this great. But sponsors are not asking proteges to be different from who they already are. They're asking other people in the social environment to see that person differently. So if you want to understand, if you're ever wondering like, oh, is this sponsorship or mentorship? You want to ask yourself, who is being asked to change? Is
Hmm.
it the person that I'm trying to help? Or is it other people and I'm trying to ask them to change how they see that person that I'm trying to help?
But it's not really as much a direct request to that person
No.
to change how you're basically, for lack of a better term, in my very limited vocabulary. You're putting on a PR campaign for that person.
Yes,
Okay.
I see it very much as marketing,
Okay.
or publicity. I know that there is some people who are in marketing and people who are in publicity are always telling me that they're not the same thing. Um, as a non-marketer, I must admit that the difference is lost on me. But yes, you're absolutely right. So if you want to think of proteges as being kind of like the product
And the
that is
protege would be the person with a sponsor.
correct.
Okay.
Yes. So I try to be very precise since I am am making clear that mentorship is not the same as sponsorship. So then when I talk about the different targets, the people who are being helped, if I'm talking about mentorship, I would call that person a mentee. But then if we're talking about sponsorship, I'll either call them a protege. Other people sometimes call them sponsees.
Mhm.
But yes, I like to be clear on the language.
If you call me a protege, I have to drink with my
Oh,
pinky up in the air.
okay. All right. Sponsee it is.
Okay. Now, so what about the argument then? There's been talk of meritocracy a lot lately, and I'm a big believer in meritocracy. But what about the argument that, well, if you really are good at what you do, you don't need a sponsor because the cream always rises to the top?
Yeah. So I also am a big believer in meritocracy. The unfortunate part of it is that enacting meritocracy is often very difficult. And so the book opens with the story of Kim Ang, and for your listeners, if you're not baseball fans, uh, she was the first female general manager of actually of any major sports league team in the United States. So she was the general manager for the Miami Marlins. She got the job in 2020. Um, and as soon as she got the job, there was this huge fanfare around her getting the job because she was the first. But then once she got on people's radars, people started wondering, wait, this woman was ready like 10, 15 years ago. Why has it taken so long? And so I start with that example because it wasn't that there was anything wrong with her. She was actually really great. People even recognized that she was great, a decade prior to her finally getting the top job. But it wasn't until a sponsor came along and said, "Look, y'all are missing.
And that
You're
is,
missing this."
and if you don't know her name, you probably know the sponsor's name.
Yes, her
Yeah.
sponsor was Derek Jeter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Derek Jeter was co-owner and CEO of the Miami Marlins at that time. Um, and apparently, he was working with a different GM when he first started that role. They parted ways. He was looking for someone new. He says in interviews later, he says that, Kim was actually the only person that he ever had in mind for that role. But it's not like he gave her like back channel help. That was the only time he talked to her other than when he interviewed her. It was just he needed to know if she was interested,
Hmm.
and then he actually had to go and convince the decision makers that hiring a woman is not really as risky as you might think. In fact, she had more of a track record by then than most candidates. Because if he had wanted to mentor her, he could have been like, "Well, Kim, when they ask you this, you should say this."
Hmm.
Right? Because this is what they're looking for. But that is not what she needed. She knew what she thought about the situation,
Right.
and she said, what she wanted to be doing and how she would approach that role, and it actually worked out really well. She ended up doing very well for the Marlins.
Yeah, and she opted not to renew her contract there when they made some management changes that she didn't. I mean, I've got a lot of appreciation for somebody who'll say, "Yeah, this isn't the place for me anymore," and she opted out of it. And I think that's a really interesting story because you know Jeter steps up and does that. Somebody who, like you said, was probably obvious if you were just looking at bullet points on a piece of paper. But when it got there down the road, uh, you know, when the actual, we're picking teams or whatever.
Right.
The last kid on the playground to get chosen every time. So I
Yeah.
always, my own trauma here comes out. But she wasn't getting chosen. She
Right.
they didn't even consider that. And one of the other quotes you said is that mentors talk to you and sponsors talk about you. And I think that's kind of the example here, right? That Jeter stepped up. He said, "Hey, do we know that? What about this person over here?" And I'll share early in my HR career, I was a bull in a china shop in a lot of ways. I was probably way too, certainly I was way too cocksure. But I had certain skills, not Liam Neeson style, but I had a certain set of skills so that I could bring to bear. And I didn't have any patience with people who couldn't keep up with me and all of that. I was early, I was in my mid 20s. And I had a VP of HR who I reported to, who both pulled me aside mentor wise and told me to, clean up my act a little bit and have a little empathy. But she also put me out in front of audiences internally in the company that led to me being able to both change my own behavior because of what she said to me, but also
Mhm.
have opportunities because she did put me out there and people said, okay, well, maybe he is an a-hole, but he's also got these skills and maybe we can work around, we can soften his edges a little bit. And it, more or less did. And so let's get into then, how does, and I think we've kind of touched on it, if sponsorship means that somebody is going to identify you and promote you, how do you get a sponsor? And is there a risk of having the wrong sponsor?
Oh, those are really great questions. Separate questions,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
but
Well, welcome to
related.
my show. I'm gonna throw 5 of them at you and at once, yeah.
Well, so okay, so before I answer your questions, though, I want to go back to clarify one thing that I think is really important, which is even though we make this distinction between mentorship and sponsorship, your example shows very clearly that you can get both from the same person. Because sometimes there's this like, well, can a mentor not be a sponsor? Like, no,
Mhm.
you can be a mentor and be a sponsor. So I just wanted to be clear on that point. It's just that often you also have situations where people are mentors but not sponsors, because they're giving all this advice to a mentee, but they're not giving them these opportunities to be more visible to other people.
Yeah, and I'll get to my other 8 questions already asked, but let me, while we're on that, the does that mean, everybody knows the teacher's pet in the office. You risk, if somebody that you've actively taken interest in developing, if you're also promoting them in the organization, do you risk that dynamic that, oh, that's the boss's, favorite? And I can say that I probably had that reputation a little bit early in my 20s.
Mm,
This process is going on, but do you see, is that something
yes.
that could
Okay.
really negatively impact the process?
Yeah. It so that's like I love this example, because I think what it starts getting us into are these is a different distinction, which is the one between power and status, and how, um, if you have a very powerful sponsor who is just like giving all the opportunities to you on a silver platter, um, people are not going to be very happy about that. You will get the opportunities because that person's the boss and they don't want to upset them, right? But are they going to think well of you? Probably not, because they're going to think that the reason you got that opportunity is because of your relationship with that person. And so the savvy sponsor, I would argue, isn't someone who like throws their weight around in getting their protege or their sponsee these opportunities. But what they're actually doing is changing how other people see the sponsees so that they want to give those
Mm.
opportunities to the sponsees. So it's about, um, you have a particular outcome that you want, but you want the other person to feel like they chose it themselves.
Okay. Right. Well, that's sales 101, right? I mean,
Uh-huh,
everybody
exactly.
wants to buy, nobody wants to be sold to,
Right.
right? Yeah. Okay.
Right, exactly. So, savvy sponsors are the ones who sponsor without making it very obvious.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. And so you can do both. How often is it that it seems like those two things would almost naturally go together? How often do you see that somebody is only acting as a sponsor versus being a mentor?
So I actually had this experience myself where I had a sponsor who then became a mentor, but was not a mentor before they
Mhm.
became a sponsor. So it was someone who saw me teaching in executive education, really liked what he saw, came up to me, complimented me after my session. I was very, uh, very pleased to get the compliment. Um, and then a few months later came back and actually asked me to join him in developing a session that we delivered together actually for the US Naval War College.
Mm.
And so I got to actually speak with like 3-star generals and actually I apologize since it was the Navy admirals.
Ah,
Um, it was an opportunity I would absolutely never have gotten if it hadn't been for him bringing me in for this opportunity, but it was entirely because he saw me performing in this other space, was impressed with what he saw, sufficiently so that he thought that I could transfer the things that he saw in that space into this new space.
and so in that case, that person didn't have to go to other people directly and say, "Hey, you should have Rosalind come speak at this conference or whatever." But just by having you on stage and delivering alongside him, he gave some of his status to you, I guess, and
Yeah.
or and then but you still had to prove yourself, right? I mean,
Yes.
if he had brought you up there and you just picked your nose for an hour on the stage, it wouldn't have benefited you.
Correct. Yes. Yes. So you're absolutely right. There might be like degrees of different varieties of sponsorship that we could talk about. So a stronger version would be him something like, I can't teach the session, but here's this other person who I'm going to vouch for, and I'm not going to be around. Like, good luck with that. Like,
Yeah,
she's going to be great. That was not that case here because we did it together. But this happens all the time. I mean, so I also share in the book the story of Sal Khan, who's the founder of Khan Academy, and he actually, he's putting out these videos on YouTube for Khan Academy and was running out of money and was like about to fold because he was very stressed out and had left this very lucrative career in investment banking to, to follow his heart's passion, which
right.
was democratizing education. And his lucky break, his sponsor was Bill Gates. But again, Bill Gates did not know Sal Khan. It was just that at the Aspen Institute, the interviewer asked Bill Gates, like, what do you see as being the one of the next like exciting things in the education space? And Bill Gates basically tells the story of Sal Khan and is like, here's this guy, he's on YouTube, he puts out absolutely fantastic content. I use it, my kids use it. Right. I mean, how much better of an endorsement can you get
Right.
than Bill Gates being like, I use this stuff?
Yeah, that'd be
um,
pretty good. And if Bill
right.
Gates is listening, I'd love to have you on the podcast.
um, so, yeah. And so in that case, right, Bill Gates never was involved one way or another with Sal
Right.
Khan, but like after that point, Khan Academy just took
Oh,
off,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because now suddenly he was very visible to people
And
who had
and
lots of
created a
money.
whole world, right? I mean, created a whole industry. I mean,
Yeah,
they were the forerunner of going online to learn something, and so yeah.
exactly.
So you kind of touched on it. You say there are four different kinds of sponsorship, or four jobs, I guess, of a sponsor.
Hmm.
Kind of run through those, how you see those.
Well, you know what? Since we talked about marketing earlier, this
Yeah.
might actually fit in, right? I mean, thinking again about like your product. On the positive side, is like, is it a new product? Are you creating people's understanding of this thing, of this person in this case, right? Who they have no experience with. So creating is one job of a sponsor, is actually creating relationships, creating impressions with people who are unaware of who the sponsee is. Um, Alternatively, you have existing products that
Mhm.
people already like, right? And you just every now and then you just kind of want to boost them up a little bit, just to make it clear that they're still around, you know. So that's what I call confirming. So an impression already exists. It's already a positive impression. You're just keeping that fire alive,
Right.
right?
And
Um, yeah.
you're really, I guess, lending your credibility to what you also call the good gossip. I think
Uh
the
huh.
the
That's right.
positive things people say about this person, and then you've got somebody of some stature saying, "Oh yeah, Rosalind is," and just cementing that. Right.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the whole, using your own reputation and essentially giving somebody your stamp of approval. And I talk about this in the book as like trust transitivity, where sponsors are essentially saying, well, you trust me, right? Well, if you trust me and I trust them, you should trust them too. But that's also where sponsors can get burned,
Right.
because if it turns out that their trust is unwarranted, it's not just bad for the sponsee who like crashes and burns,
Right.
but the sponsor's reputation also takes a hit, because their relationship with the person they've sponsored the sponsee to, is now that trust relationship is
Right.
not going to be as strong.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. 26 years ago, I founded Imperative to help risk averse companies make well informed decisions about the people they involve in their business. Often that involves giving employers thorough and easy to understand background checks on prospective employees. But sometimes it means helping families make well informed decisions when hiring nannies or other caregivers. And as we've grown, we've expanded into all kinds of other due diligence projects: know your customer requirements, due diligence for investors, and even litigation support investigations. Basically, if people are involved, there's risk involved. We help companies identify and mitigate that risk. You can learn more at imperativeinfo.com. And if you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre approved for 3/4 of a recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 204 and enter the keyword sponsor. That's SPONSOR. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Rosalind Chow. It goes back to credibility. I mean, celebrity endorsements. How many times have we seen
Right.
celebrities endorse a product and then it turned out to be bad, and
Right.
what they said, and their credibility is injured.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, so we've got create and confirm, and
And
then
then
you
there's the
yeah
negative
yeah
side, right? So this is like when you're there's a damage control going on, for products. This probably doesn't happen in marketing, but here we talk. So it's, does an impression exist or not? When the impression doesn't exist and you're trying to enhance and create a positive impression, that's the creation side.
Mhm.
But if there's, you might have a different goal, which is, I will really want to make sure that this person is not seen poorly.
Mhm.
And so that's the prevention side. This is when you're heading off potential risks to the sponsee. So this would be things like, You know that there's a manager out there who has a bad reputation. Earlier, you asked about what do you do if you like, do you want to have any sponsor? No, actually, you want a sponsor who other people trust. And if there are people out there who have a bad reputation, you as a sponsor can work to make sure that your sponsee is like not connected or associated with this person in
Mhm.
any way, so you can head off some of these potential pitfalls
And
for
that
the
probably ties
sponsee.
into the mentorship too as well, right? Telling
Right.
the sponsee or the protege, hey, by the way, you know, this other VP may be making a play for, to get you on their team or whatever, but you need to understand this history or whatever.
Right. So, yes. So, and I think this is another great place to talk about just why it's so important for sponsors sometimes to step in, because you're absolutely right. One possibility is just to go to the mentee and be like, Mike, this person's going to ask you to do something. If they ask you, don't do it.
Run away.
find
Yeah.
find
Yeah.
any excuse whatsoever, right, to not do it. Except when oftentimes when you're more junior in your career, you don't feel like you can say no. And there is also a very real possibility that if you say no, you'll get tagged as like not being a team player, or, like not willing to do the hard work or things like that. And so as a sponsor, you can essentially take on that damage for your protege, right?
Mhm.
By making some excuse for them, explaining why, like, maybe Mike is not the best fit
Mm.
for this particular project, or I have Mike working on this over here. It's taking a lot of time. It's a very important project. I really do not want him to be pulled in multiple directions. So, like, go find someone else, and in that case, the sponsee doesn't run the risk of anyone questioning, like, are they a
Yeah.
team player?
Right. Yeah. Why? Yeah. You get tarred by the reputation of somebody else.
Right.
And then there's protect,
Yes.
which it sounds like the prevention, but I think it's maybe more malevolent actions against the person you're trying to fight off. Is that
Yeah. So if prevention is about making sure that your sponsee doesn't gain a negative reputation, protection is like, unfortunately, something has happened and your protege is getting criticized. Either, legitimately, well, let's say illegitimately.
yeah?
Because if it were illegitimate, I mean, sorry, if it were legitimate and they really should be like taking the heat on something,
Mhm.
as a sponsor, you're kind of like, maybe I can maybe I can work to make the fallout not quite so bad.
Or
But
make sure
there's
it's in the
only,
right context, right? Yeah.
sure,
Right.
yeah. But protection is, it's basically like somebody is maligning your sponsee, and you think it's not entirely correct or just entirely incorrect, but to some their degrees, and that's your opportunity to weigh in and say, well, that's not my experience working with this person. Let me offer a different perspective. I'm not sure you have all the information, right? Here's the context that they were operating under. This is why they made that decision. And if, I were in their position and that was the information I had access to, I probably would have made that same decision. And it's unfortunate that things unfolded the way that they did, but I think, like, I don't know that I would blame them necessarily for having made that particular decision. So it's just providing a different narrative for understanding what is going on with people. Now, the thing about protection is it's very costly for sponsors to
Right.
engage in protection, right? Because somebody has just said, shared a belief about
Hmm.
what they think about someone, and you're essentially telling them that you think that they're wrong.
Right.
And most people don't like that. So sponsors need to. This is where having a more powerful sponsor can actually be very helpful, because that, powerful sponsors can just throw their power around and just shut that down if they really want to. Doesn't necessarily change how other people think about the sponsee, but at least they're not going to be penalized in sort of like a more formal way
Mhm.
within the organization.
And maybe if they continue to get that visibility, they can sway other people to their side of the thing,
Right.
by being a performer who
Exactly. Right. Like that was a blip, or, I mean, people can,
we all
there are,
screw up. I mean,
there are all causes
yeah,
for,
right, yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
So, but given all of that, why in the world would somebody risk their own credibility by being a sponsor?
So, yeah, that's a really great question. And frankly, it's because it's just like any sort of investment, right? It's the riskier the investment, the greater the upside if everything works out. So sponsors actually they gain in reputation themselves from elevating great people.
Mm, right.
So,
Yeah, we hear that all the time about certain leaders are just amazing at picking talent and
right.
promoting talent. And okay,
Yeah, and I know that part of what we want to create are institutions where people feel excited to be there and that they want to stay. You're Of course you're going to be more excited about staying in an institution where you feel like you're seen, where you're appreciated, and that people are valued for all of their talent, right? That people are paying attention.
does there have to be a reporting relationship, or some sort of
No.
hierarchical relationship for a sponsor to really be credible?
So this is where I think I differ in between some other people who also talk about sponsorship. Prior people who have studied sponsorship have usually made it definitional that sponsors have to be more powerful. Not to get very like academic-y, but my whole argument is that sponsorship actually hinges on trust, and where trust comes from is actually from status. And status can be does not follow the formal org chart,
Right,
right? You have people who are mid-level or even lower level who are trusted by the people around them.
right.
And so you can have even very low level people sponsoring others. So, for example, you just started working at a company. Maybe you're just an intern, but you're gossiping. Here, going back to good gossip, right? You're gossiping with the other interns about your experience, and you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I am working with Mike because he's such a great manager. He's really been helping me develop. Okay, so you've just shared information about
Right.
Mike, the amazing manager.
Yeah.
And let's say that one of those interns then gets a full time position offer, right? And then they're asked, well, who would you like to work with? Well, now that intern is going to be like, I have heard great things about manager Mike.
Mhm.
I'd like to work with him, right? So, intern, no power in the standard way that we would be thinking about it, but definitely has status within the eyes of their peers.
Right.
And so they're sharing information that is changing how their peers see other people in the organization, that is dictating or influencing their behavior. And magical manager Mike gets all the benefit because he's a great manager. It means that more of the high, like top talent, once they find out about him, they're gonna want to work with him. So this is actually borne out in research. Managers who are better at successfully getting their direct reports promoted typically end up getting more internal applications to join their
Build a better
team,
team. Yeah.
right? And those applicants tend to be higher quality too.
So, a lot of organizations have had, or at least tried to create mentorship programs, more formal programs for that, and with varying degrees of success. I mean, a lot of them in both professional organizations and inside of companies, they just don't seem to really serve the purpose that they try to. But if I've never heard of a sponsorship program or formal program to promote that. But if I'm at a place in my career where I'm actively looking for a sponsor, how do I go find sponsor, I mean, that's, it's one thing to say, to approach, somebody with more experience or knows the organization better and say, hey, can I pick your brain about something, and can I get
Hmm.
you right here, and kind of develop that mentorship and mentee relationship. But how does, if one wants a sponsor, do you just kind of wait? Is it sponsor will find the protege, or is there a way to actively go out and hunt one down?
Well, so in general, I like to say that sponsees don't have as much control over this process because ultimately it's the sponsor who decides if they want to sponsor or not. So Sal Khan is not
Yeah,
going out and being like, "Hey, Bill Gates, can you talk about
right.
me at the Aspen Institute?" Right? Bill Gates is the one who makes that decision. The best you can do really is just make yourself as sponsorable as possible, and that means being a top performer. But I will say that the other thing that you can do, and that I think Sal Khan did really well, is to tell your own story in terms of what drives you. Because Bill Gates, in sponsoring Sal Khan, wasn't just, hey, go to this YouTube page. This guy has amazing videos. It was, hey, this guy has amazing videos. And don't you know, he gave up this very lucrative career to follow his passion of democratizing education, which gave this backstory of why Sal Khan was doing this, right? It was his passion. That he had these very strong values, and really wanted to share more broadly, right? The benefits of
Mhm.
amazing education to a wider audience than would otherwise have access to it. I mean, it was a story that I think was very compelling to people in the audience, which made it all the easier for them to then, like, it would be great, right? Like, sure, this guy has great YouTube videos, but when you have that backstory of like, look what he gave up, why is
Mhm.
he doing this? I mean, I'm sure that helped him get funders, after he became more visible. So, as a sponsee, I would say that yes, do a good job, but we all know that that's table stakes. The other thing then that really compels people to want to step up to the plate for you is to be someone who is passionate about something that other people also are passionate about. And so, if you can make your values, make your motivations clear to others, if you become a lot easier to sponsor.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Like if Sal Khan had just been some Silicon Valley venture backed wannabe entrepreneur, and just I'm going to make $1 million. I've got an idea, and that was his
Right.
story. It wouldn't have resonated with Gates.
Right.
And even if Gates had said, this young kid has got this idea, this guy's got this idea, and I think he's going to make a lot of money on it, that wouldn't have moved people to support him and to really check it out. It would have been just another
Another tech.
backed,
Yeah.
entrepreneur. Yeah, just yet another one. That's interesting. So the last line of your subtitle is about creating a more inclusive workplace. So how does this whole sponsorship model really ultimately do that?
So it well, first of all, I feel very academic saying this, but it really depends on what we mean by inclusive.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Okay, let's start there. Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
And when I think about whether or not I'm being included, usually it's about feeling like you're seen, that you're valued, that your presence matters, that if you weren't there, that people would notice. And so sponsorship, like, what is sponsorship other than making it clear that someone is seen and is noticed, and that it would be unfortunate if they weren't there? Because when sponsors are going out, right, I've been thinking about protection. The sponsor is essentially saying, like, we do not want to lose this person.
Right.
It would be a loss to the group if if we were to fire them, let's say. And at the same time, when you're talking about the positive side, it's, aren't we so glad that we have this person because they have so much to contribute to the group. And let's find more ways for us to utilize, magical Mike's talents, right? So many of us we don't get told what our strengths are or what our superpowers are or anything like that. It can be really life changing when someone sees that in you. I don't even mean in terms of giving you more opportunities, although that's clearly part of what we're talking about. Like
Mhm.
that's a later outcome, but it's incredibly meaningful when people tell us what kind of impact we have. And so something I would actually suggest for your listeners to do, right, is just think about the people who positively contribute to your daily life at work. If there's someone who makes your job a lot easier or makes it more enjoyable to do something that's typically not very enjoyable, tell them about that, right? Like say like, you know what, thank you. Thank you for making this a better place for me. And then on top of that, make sure that other people know them too, right? So talk about how this person has a positive impact on you to other people, not just to that person. And that's the very easiest way to sponsor.
So when you're talking about inclusive, then it's not so much, although I think that is definitely an uh, part of the book, but it's not so much about just targeting people who are already underrepresented or who are in an underrepresented group or something, as
Mm-mm.
much as it is finding the high performers, the people, high potential folks who either aren't getting the attention that they need and that they ought to have for whatever. It could just be they work for a jerk boss who's just keeping his thumb down on them, and so it's more about that kind of inclusion, making sure that the cream does rise to the top, that we're not holding people back just because of whatever the circumstances are that.
Um, so yes, so there's that version of, I mean, the book is, I would say, a little bit choose your own adventure of how far down the line you want to go with that, right? So I do talk about in the book how, you can't sponsor people you don't know. And so there's a whole section in the book about how we tend to compose our social networks.
That is a perfect place to end it. Thank you so much for joining me today, Rosalind. I really enjoyed this. And the book is The Doors You Can Open: A New Way to Network, Build Trust, and Use Your Influence to Create a More Inclusive Workplace. We'll include links to the book and contact info for Rosalind in the show notes. And thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please write us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening, and share this episode on your favorite social media platform. It really does help people find us, and maybe we can help them. Be a sponsor imperative. In fact, if you want to write a check sponsorship, holler at me. But we would love to hear your thoughts at goodmorninghr.com. And thank you to Marianne Hernandez and Paco Corral for their hard work in putting this episode together. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week. And until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.